What up YouTube, Bonza here, back with another video. This video is kind of a long time coming. I've been trying my best to record it, well, write the script and organize it and record it, but I've had so many hiccups regarding it because I had too many things to say on the Doctor Strange 2 movie that came out a while ago. So like, I was originally trying to do a film review, but as I was working on my review, I just wrote this freaking 30-40 minute long script and I knew that I just couldn't do it. So I ended up putting this off by about a week and trying to think through it, and eventually I figured out a way to get it to work. So basically it's not going to be a film review, but instead it's going to be a film essay on a very specific topic regarding the film that I think kind of overshadows the film. As you can probably tell from the tone of my voice, I was mostly dissatisfied with this movie. I didn't hate it as much as some, but I certainly didn't like it. There were some elements that kind of saved the movie for me, mostly to do with the directing of Sam Raimi and some of the visuals and stuff like that. I ended up giving it a 5 out of 10 in my original review, which is basically a meh. I was entertained and annoyed for the most part equally throughout the film. Over time I sort of calmed down a bit, I guess, but originally I really hated the film after seeing it the first time. So since then I've sort of just been seeing online reviews by other critics, and as I was looking through the reviews, I noticed a lot of them echoed the same basic thought that I had about the film, and it was that Scarlet Witch ended up overshadowing Doctor Strange in his own film, which I agree with, by the way. But as I was looking through all these different reviews, I came across one by a YouTuber by the name of Jeremy Jazz, and he brought up a very interesting point.
I've also seen the argument that she takes the shine away from Doctor Strange in his own movie, but Doctor Strange is still the protagonist. She's the antagonist. I mean, to be fair to that point, Thanos did the same thing to the Avengers in an Avengers movie. The movie was titled Avengers Infinity War. Who's the coolest character in the movie? Exactly. It's Thanos. Yeah, Thanos stood out. Thanos stole the show.
This is true, in my opinion. Thanos did really kind of steal Avengers Infinity War, if you kind of think about it. He had an enormous screen presence, right? And I'm not just talking about the time he spent on screen. And he came off as a very compelling character and had a goal which the majority of audiences kind of understood. So this left me with a very interesting question. And the question is, how did Scarlet Witch steal Doctor Strange 2? I felt that this would be a more helpful addition to the online discourse regarding the film, as well as a way for me to add my unique spin to it. So with that, let's begin our video on how Scarlet Witch stole Doctor Strange 2. So Doctor Strange 2 is a film by director Sam Raimi, who I loved, right? And his work in this film was really good. In fact, most of the things that I liked about the film, I think, were pretty much thanks to him and the effects team behind him. And it was written by writers Michael Waldron and Jade Bartlett, whom I greatly suspect of having a bit of a bias against our titular character of Doctor Strange, which for someone like me who's a fan is a big problem. Now the film revolves around, of course, Doctor Strange, the MCU Doctor Strange, #My616, trying to save the life of a universe-hopping mutant? I just call her a mutant because I don't know what to call her. By the name of America Chavez, whom I'll refer to as Chavez from now on because calling her America kind of feels off for me. The main antagonist of the film is the Scarlet Witch, the new persona adopted by Wanda Maximoff, the MCU Wanda Maximoff. And she adopts that persona, as you all know, due to a lot of the grief and trauma she suffered throughout her life. Originally growing up without her parents from that explosion that we saw in the WandaVision show. And then she goes on later in her life to be used in experiments, and then has her brother killed in front of her, loses her homeland, loses her husband, and then sees her children basically evaporate into nothingness. So that being said, it actually makes a lot of sense for Wanda to then go on from being a hero into this villainous arc that we see her go through in this film. And so, yeah, no problems there with Wanda becoming a villain, but obviously the execution wasn't as good as it could have been. They certainly got Wanda herself right, but I feel like they messed up, especially with regards to Strange and some of the other elements. And so that's why it ends up feeling the way that it does in the film, that Wanda's overshadowing Strange, but not necessarily in a deserved way, is how I would put it. So that's my brief synopsis of this film. Now let's go on to talk about the actual meat of this video. So when do these problems begin? I think it's particularly important to recognize when they start because it's kind of subtle. To me, it begins during the two dialogues that happen between Scarlet Witch and Strange prior to the actual fight between them at Kamar-Taj. So what then does happen with these two dialogues? Essentially, the writers fail to establish a proper balance to the conflict between the two main characters of the show, our two main protagonists, Wanda, Scarlet Witch, and Doctor Strange. Now they do something very good here, which is that they make Scarlet Witch very strong and assertive in her position, and you can sort of feel the conviction she has with the decision that she's made to go through with what she's made. And that's a good thing. You want that in your villain, and given her backstory and everything, it brings a lot of weight in with what she's saying. So this is a good thing. It's good to have your villain be this assertive. The issue though is that they then have to make sure that the protagonist is able to meet them, or at the very least rise to a certain level where they're equivalent to each other, right? It's okay if the hero starts off a little unsure of himself, but provided that you make sure that they clearly have the moral high ground, which Strange does have in this situation, and make sure that the audience is aware that, you know, even if the hero is reluctant in some way to fight their friend, that they're still willing to push through and do it anyway. So you have to make sure that it's strong in the minds of the viewers that this is happening. And unfortunately, I don't think they really do that appropriately in this film. And there are certain statements that Scarlet Witch says, well actually one specific statement that Scarlet Witch said that I feel like Strange had a very decent rebuttal to, but they just don't even show him trying to go against that statement that she said. And I feel like it would have been a good opportunity at that point to counter her, to actually make him still stronger in his position, in his arguments. Now this is pretty bad because even if the viewers aren't consciously aware of it, you will recognize it. You will at least subconsciously understand that this is kind of off, and so it will kind of overshadow the rest of the film even if you aren't aware of it, because you know you saw Wanda in the ethical debate prior to everything sort of win one-sidedly, and Strange, despite having the moral high ground, he didn't seem to put up enough of a resistance. And so it sort of feels like when Wanda overshadows him, it doesn't necessarily feel right. And so that's why, despite her, you know, making her stance, and it's good and it's strong, you needed Strange to sort of counter that, but you don't really see him do that well here. And so I think that's why that domino effect ends up affecting the rest of the film. So let's get into those two dialogues and actually talk about what happened.
Sooner or later, you'd show up wanting to discuss what happened at Westview. I made mistakes, and people were hurt.
But you put things right in the end, and that was never in doubt.
So in this first scene, right from the get-go, I have a very big issue. The way Strange just sort of brushes it aside, I just sort of fundamentally disagree with it. Just because she put things right doesn't mean that she's all good, right? There have to be consequences to doing evil things, and they need to be equally dealt to all the people that deal them. Just because someone went out and volunteered in a poor neighborhood doesn't mean that when they go back home they can steal from their neighbors. Now, obviously at the end of the day though, because this is just a movie and people kind of want to move on quickly to the conflict, the main conflict of this film, I guess if it had just been this, we would have just made an exception and moved on. But I feel like this was the beginning of where we could see that there was some sort of favoritism towards Wanda, and people were just kind of forgiving her and letting go of all the things that she was doing, and just sort of siding with her blindly. I mean, at least the writers were doing that. Now, as I said, in isolation this is fine, but when we observe the following conversation, it seems that a lot of the dialogue once again seemed to favor her. Observe.
Is it the one you used? When you gave Thanos the Time Stone?
was at war, and I did what I had to do.
You break the rules and become a hero. I do it and I become the enemy. That doesn't seem fair.
Firstly, Scarlet Witch having this view is understandable, but very wrong, because it doesn't take into account a lot of the context, and thus is very wrong. And I really wish that Strange had more strongly spoke against her. Maybe not necessarily at this point, but perhaps here.
That doesn't seem fair.
What happens now?
Return to Kamertage and prepare to hand over America Chavez by sundown.
Now, I know I maybe don't necessarily have to do this, but I'm going to elaborate anyway why I think there's a big difference between what Strange did and what Wanda's doing. Strange did what he did because he foresaw that one day Tony Stark would reset everything Thanos had done by snapping his fingers with the gauntlet, and so he knew that no matter what happened, he had to make sure that Tony Stark survived. So at that point, he made a decision to put himself, and yes, a lot of other innocent people, at risk in order to save Tony Stark. Now, obviously, we can't understate the problem with sacrificing these unintended people, right? A lot of these people that went away for 5 years, what happened to them is very bad and it's understandable, right? But the important thing here is the intention. What was Strange's intention? His intention was not to do all this for his own benefit. His intention was to save the day, to commit a sacrifice, yes, but in the hopes that the greater good would win out at the end of the day, and everybody would be saved. His intention was to benefit the whole universe, and that is very different from what Wanda did. Wanda, on the other hand, did what she did because yes, she was grieving and saddened because of all the things that happened to her, but then just because you're saddened and in pain, it doesn't give you a right to then hurt other people, right? I mean, this is obvious. Essentially, in a way here, what you're saying, if you agree with Wanda, is that you approve of people that take out their anger on their kids and their spouses just because they had a bad day at work. Obviously, I'm sure most of you don't believe that. So, Wanda is clearly in the moral wrong here. And what she did was so fundamentally different. It was selfish, it was done for her sake. It is definitely there's no comparison between her and Strange, really. Essentially, Wanda gets a sort of second, undeserved win with this argument here.
I do it and I become the enemy.
Because Strange never sort of counters her appropriately. Like, he could have said some version of what I'm saying, but like in a shorter, quippier way. Obviously, I over-explained it. But it needed to be said. And Strange never did say it. Now, obviously, everybody watching is subconsciously aware of this, but then because Strange never says it out loud, some of you might be like, hey, come on, why doesn't that's not different? That's not a fair comparison. You might say that out loud, but then other people, even if they don't say it out loud, will sort of, at the back of their head, they'll be saying that. And so you sort of see Wanda get these two undeserved wins, and yeah, things start to go sort of unbalanced after this first dialogue. And considering what happens in the follow-up dialogue, I feel like the balance has really been shifted in Wanda's favor. So in this second scene, look at the way Strange begins his negotiation.
All this for a child you met yesterday.
Wanda, you are justifiably angry. You had to make terrible sacrifices.
I blew a hole through the head.
Now, I'm not a professional negotiator in any way, but based on the way he started that negotiation, I feel like it was all wrong, right? He said she was justifiably angry. Now, I personally think that's a really bad way to start a negotiation. By saying that the person on the other side is justifiably angry, he's essentially legitimizing what she's doing and sort of like saying that, oh, she's sort of in the moral high ground, right? That's what justice implies. It implies you're doing what's just, you're in the moral high ground. I feel like it would have been better if he said something that was not as strongly specific or essentialist, or I don't know what the proper term is, but something along the lines of, Wanda, you are understandably angry, because I feel like there's a lot more leeway here. And I'm going to give you 2 points why I think understandably angry would have been a better alternative to justifiably angry. So one, saying that she's understandably angry actually acknowledges her pain and shows that he sympathizes with her. Now, another point to this is that it also kind of shows that he's willing to meet her halfway because he sympathizes with her, which is a good thing, right? When you're trying to negotiate, it's natural that you wind up compromising to some degree with the person that you're negotiating with. So by saying that he understands why she's angry, it shows that, again, that he sympathizes with her and is willing to meet her halfway. And then the second point, sorry, those are one point. The second point is it also allows him some leeway to state his thoughts and his position, right? Saying that she's understandably angry, unlike saying that she's justifiably angry, which is like giving her all the moral high ground, when he says she's understandably angry, implies that there's another side to this coin, and that it opens up a way for him to sort of clarify his position. And thus it gives her a chance to meet him halfway, right? So one, it shows that he sympathizes with her and shows that he's willing to meet her halfway, and two, it provides him with leeway and allows her to meet him halfway. So, negotiation, compromise. So in summary, all of this kind of circles back to what I was saying about Scarlet Witch sort of being given all of the cards at the beginning of this film through these two dialogues. Now, even the pre-battle dialogue itself that happens in this Hermitage scene just sort of cuts and ends abruptly. But then given the way he started that negotiation, it makes sense why it fell apart so quickly. Thus, at this point, the writers missed their third and final opportunity, I think, to set the stakes between Wanda and Strange's conflict for the rest of the movie. And so, before the fighting even starts, Wanda just sort of has all of the moral and understanding high ground sort of in her corner. I mean, obviously Strange still has the moral high ground, but all of the verbal argument points were sort of scored by Wanda, and Strange got nothing. This from then on can sort of put at least in the minds of some viewers, that they feel like they're watching a Wanda movie with Strange passively tagging along. So that being said, Strange being passive kind of makes sense given that he's on the defense in this film, right? Because when you're on defense, generally you tend to stay in one place and you wait for the person who's actively attacking and antagonizing to come forward. But I feel like he should have at least, even if you're on the defense, you still have to make your case, right, for your defense. And yeah, I really think Strange should have said something along the lines of, "I'm sorry, Wanda, but I can't let you hurt this girl. I understand what you've been through, but this girl does not deserve to die." Strange should have said that at least once, basically the line that I said, at least once, either in the first dialogue or the second dialogue. Unfortunately, nothing of the sort happens, and the rest is history. So, circling back to compare Scarlet Witch with Thanos, when you look at what's different between what happened to Thanos and Scarlet Witch, specifically in terms of people trying to counter their arguments, Gamora and Stark are very important characters in Avengers Infinity War. Yes, you had a lot of people, but when we're talking about Thanos specifically, his main foil was going to be Tony Stark, inevitably, and the other person who had a very strong stance against him was, of course, Gamora. That's why, with those two individuals specifically, it was very important that when they made a statement to challenge Thanos, that he would have to try to counter their arguments. I'm pretty sure Gamora had that on multiple occasions. And honestly, I can't really remember, but I think Tony Stark too did have some. And so, because you had these two pivotal characters sort of challenge Thanos, but then you see Thanos strongly react to them, and then, or maybe not strongly react to them, but sort of have a decent counter argument, it made it feel like there was sort of a back and forth, and it helped to kind of elevate Thanos in the minds of the viewers. And so, as we're going throughout the rest of Avengers Infinity War, we have a lot of respect for him, and when he steals the film, people don't necessarily feel bad about it. And another thing to consider was that whilst most viewers understood what Thanos was doing and sort of see that he had morals of his own, they were still emotionally invested in a lot of what the Avengers were going through, right? We didn't spend a lot of time on a lot of the other Avengers, but people were heavily emotionally invested. And so that's why when you have a lot of those emotions, as well as the heroes having the moral high ground, it kind of helped to balance them out against Thanos. The issue in Doctor Strange 2 is that Doctor Strange only really had the moral high ground whenever he and Scarlet Witch were sort of having their discussions. And the problem with humans in general is that even if the moral high ground is there, we generally don't tend to go after it unless we have a strong emotional reason to do it, or we have this understanding, or like something, it sort of makes sense logically, right? There are very few people who will just do something because it's the morally right thing to do. Usually people will do it because it's moral and it's also the logical thing, and or because they feel like doing it, right? It feels right to them. And so this is why I feel Strange was basically just too passive in his own movie, and why I feel that Scarlet Witch essentially had all the cards, right? Because she had all of the emotional weight. Everybody understood what she was doing, and even though we sort of like had understood that Strange had the moral high ground, whenever she tried to challenge him on like ethics of what he did and what she did, he never appropriately challenged her back. So even though everybody consciously knew, yes, Strange has the moral high ground, because he never sort of outright said it, it sort of ends up being like lost in the minds of people. And because Wanda has the understanding and all the emotional weight, it feels sort of overbalanced in her favor. And so that's fundamentally why I feel like when compared to Thanos, when Wanda stole this film, people were just not okay with it. It didn't feel right to them because it didn't feel legitimate the way it felt when Thanos stole it. When Thanos stole it, he had people's understanding, and yeah, he sort of made his own moral high ground and whatever. But then the issue was, despite the fact that people understood Thanos, they knew that the heroes had the moral high ground and they were already emotionally invested in the hero. So even if they didn't get all of the screen time and everything to understand what the heroes were doing all the time, they still felt for them, and the heroes had the moral high ground. So it balanced out. So that basically brings me to the end of this video. Sort of summarize again, I feel like the writers place way too much emphasis on telling Scarlet Witch's story and did not give enough weight to the titular character to balance Scarlet Witch against Doctor Strange. This drags the whole film down because even though you have Scarlet Witch who has a very strong conviction and stance that's understandable, you need the protagonist to also rise to that level or to an equivalent level. But that doesn't happen in the film, and it ends up causing Scarlet Witch to overshadow Strange throughout the rest of the film. When this happens, you get a lot of fans of Doctor Strange like myself who get pretty upset and they really don't like your film. And even if other viewers aren't able to like put a word to it, a lot of people will also feel that yeah, this movie felt more like a Scarlet Witch movie than a Doctor Strange movie. So that's my opinion on how Scarlet Witch stole Doctor Strange 2. Thank you very much for watching this video. It was pretty hectic to make. I had to, like I said, write so many drafts and do multiple recordings. But we got to this final point now, and I'm happy to finally release this video for you guys to see. So with that, guys, this is Bonsai signing out. Catch you all later.